They sold millions of albums and filled stadiums, but they paid a heavy price with their health. The lifestyle caught up to them in ways you simply won't believe. From faces that changed shape to voices that completely disappeared, this is the dark side of fame. Stick around to find out which singer actually has a medical file saying he is a genetic mutant because he survived this long. 1. Ozzy Osbourne. Everyone knows the Prince of Darkness. In the 70s and 80s, Ozzy Osbourne was the wildest man on the planet. He was the voice of Black Sabbath and then had a massive solo career. He had long hair, a crazy look in his eyes, and he would run around the stage like a madman. He is famous for biting the head off a bat, which is a story that has been told a million times. But the thing nobody tells you is what all those years of partying did to his body. Ozzy lived a life that would have ended most people. In fact, a company actually studied his DNA and found out he has a rare genetic mutation that allowed him to survive his high intake of dangerous substances. That is a real wow factor right there. He is medically a marvel. But even with super DNA, time caught up with him. Today, Ozzy is a very different man. He is 76 years old and the wild running is gone. He was diagnosed with a form of Parkinson's disease, which makes his body shake and his muscles stiff. It is sad to see him now because he often needs a cane or a wheelchair to get around. The man who used to leap into the crowd can barely stand on his own. He looks frail, with gray hair and a face that shows every single mile he traveled. He has tried to tour recently, but his body just keeps saying no. He has fallen down at home and hurt his neck and back, leading to multiple surgeries. It is a stark reminder that even the Prince of Darkness is only human after all. But if you think Ozzy's physical decline is intense, wait until you hear about the frontman of Pantera. This next guy was the symbol of strength in the 90s, but a terrible back injury and some bad habits turned him into an old man way before his time. 2. Phil Anselmo. In the early 90s, there was no band tougher than Pantera, and leading the charge was Phil Anselmo. He was a beast. He had a shaved head, huge muscles, and a voice that could shatter glass. He would stomp around the stage like a tiger ready to attack. He was the definition of power and aggression. When he screamed "Cowboys from Hell," you felt it in your chest. However, the human body is not meant to take that kind of punishment forever. Phil Anselmo pushed himself too hard. He jumped off high drum risers every night, landing hard on the floor. This destroyed his lower back. He was in constant pain. To deal with the pain, he started using some very heavy substances to numb himself. This was the start of a downward spiral. The Phil Anselmo of today looks almost nothing like the powerhouse from 1992. He is 56 years old, but he looks much older. His face is bloated and puffy, and his voice has lost a lot of that high-pitched power. He moves slowly now. The back injury was so bad that he needed major surgery just to be able to walk. For a long time, he could barely move from the neck down without hurting. He gained a lot of weight and lost that sharp, dangerous edge he used to have. It is a classic case of rock and roll taking more than it gives. He is still touring, but it is clear that he is fighting through a lot of damage. While Phil lost his physical edge to injury, our next star lost his looks to something else entirely. He was once considered one of the most beautiful men in rock, but the internet has not been kind to how much his appearance has changed. 3. Axl Rose. If you turned on MTV in 1988, you saw Axl Rose. The singer for Guns N' Roses was the ultimate rock heartthrob. He had the long red hair, the bandana, and the slim physique. He moved like a snake on stage. Girls loved him and guys wanted to be him. When he sang November Rain, he looked like a movie star. He was the face of danger and cool. But then Axl disappeared for a long time. Guns N' Roses took a huge break, and Axl went into hiding. When he finally came back into the spotlight years later, fans were in for a shock. The slim, energetic singer was gone. In his place was a man who looked very different. Axl Rose had gained a significant amount of weight. He was balding, and his face looked swollen. The internet can be a cruel place, and people started making memes calling him Fat Axl. It got so bad that Axl actually tried to sue Google to get the unflattering photos taken down. That is a pretty wild move, but you cannot sue time. Now at 63, he still tours, but he runs out of breath faster. His voice, which used to be a high-pitched siren, often struggles to hit those famous notes. He tries hard, but seeing him now is a reminder that the pretty boy era of rock is long gone. Axl struggled with his weight, but at least he is still with us. The next singer on our list had a battle with personal demons that aged him 30 years in a single decade, leading to a tragic and early end. 4. Scott Weiland. Scott Weiland was the voice of Stone Temple Pilots and Velvet Revolver. In the 90s, he was mesmerizing. He was thin, handsome, and would dance with a megaphone in a way that was totally unique. He had a glam rock style that made him stand out from the grunge crowd. He changed his hair color constantly and always looked sharp. However, Scott had a very public battle with hard substances. He was in and out of rehab for years. This lifestyle takes a massive toll on your appearance. By the time he reached his 40s, the change was frightening. The handsome face became gaunt and sunken. His skin looked gray and tired. In his final years, watching him perform was difficult. He would forget lyrics and move slowly, lacking that electric energy he once had. The sparkle in his eyes was gone. Looked like an old man despite only being in his mid-40s. Sadly, he passed away on his tour bus at the age of 48. The cause was an accidental overdose of a mix of substances. It was a heartbreaking end to a talented star. His aging process was accelerated by the toxic things he put in his body. He went from a vibrant rock star to a frail shadow in record time. Scott's story is sad, but the decline of the Alice in Chains singer is perhaps the most painful thing to witness in music history. He didn't just age, he slowly faded away until there was nothing left. 5. Lane Staley. Lane Staley had one of the best voices in history. He sang for Alice in Chains, and his voice was full of pain and power. In the early 90s, he was a handsome guy with blonde dreadlocks and a cool goatee. He looked strong and intense. But Lane was fighting a very heavy addiction to dangerous powders. After his girlfriend passed away in 1996, Lane simply gave up. He locked himself in his condo in Seattle and stopped seeing people. He stopped making music. He stopped eating properly. For years, nobody saw him. When he did rarely appear, he looked terrifying. He had lost several teeth, and his skin was pale as a ghost. He became incredibly skinny, weighing very little. By the time he passed away in 2002 at the age of 34, he looked like a man in his 80s. His body had completely shut down. He was found weeks after he had passed, which is a detail that still haunts fans today. He wasted away in total isolation. It is the ultimate example of how self-destruction can steal your youth and your life. He didn't just age terribly, he destroyed himself from the inside out. From the tragedy of Seattle grunge, we move to the speed of thrash metal. The leader of Megadeth was known for being fast and furious, but a series of health scares has forced him to slow down in a major way. 6. Dave Mustaine. Dave Mustaine is the mastermind behind Megadeth. He was kicked out of Metallica and started his own band out of pure anger and drive. For years, he was known for his long red hair and his lightning-fast guitar playing. He was skinny, angry, and unstoppable. He lived the fast life, drinking heavily and partying hard in the 80s. But the body keeps the score. As Dave got older, things started to break down. First, he suffered a serious nerve injury in his arm after falling asleep on it in a chair. He had to learn how to play guitar all over again. That is a wow factor of determination right there, but the health battles did not stop. Now, at 63, Dave has battled throat cancer. He beat it, which is amazing, but the treatment was brutal. It aged his face and changed his voice. He also suffers from neck and back issues from years of headbanging. He has had to undergo surgery to fuse bones in his neck. There have been shows where he looked visibly in pain. His once fiery red hair is thinning and graying, though he dyes it. He looks like a tired Ditatiul, warrior who has fought too many battles. He is still touring, but the days of him sprinting across the stage are over. Dave Mustaine's neck issues are bad, but the guitarist for Slayer took headbanging to such an extreme that his current look is a total shock compared to his early days. 7. Kerry King. When Slayer first started, Kerry King had a full head of long hair. It is a weird image if you only know him from recent years. He looked like a typical 80s metalhead. But over time, he transformed into something much scarier, and then eventually into someone who just looks tired. Kerry shaved his head and grew a massive beard. He covered his entire scalp and arms in tattoos. For a long time, he looked like a tough biker. But recently, the age has really started to show. He is 61 now, and the years of touring in sweaty clubs have made his skin look leathery and worn. He is definitely carrying some extra weight around the middle that was not there before. But the real issue is the wear and tear on his body. He has been headbanging in a circle for 40 years. That motion ruins your spine. He often looks stiff on stage now. He stands in one spot, looking more like a statue than a performer. He has also had his own health scares that he keeps private, but in interviews he often talks about how much harder it is to play at that speed now. The tattoos have faded and blurred, making him look like a worn-out drawing. Speaking of leather and metal, the next singer is known as the Metal God. He has aged, but his transformation from a young rocker to an elderly man with a cane is a stark reminder of the passage of time. 8. Rob Halford. Rob Halford is the voice of Judas Priest. In his prime, he was terrifying in the best way. He wore studs, leather, and rode a Harley-Davidson motorcycle onto the stage every night. He had a voice that could shatter windows. He was powerful and imposing. Rob is now 73 years old. While he is still performing, he looks very different. He is completely bald and has a long white beard, making him look a bit like a heavy metal Santa Claus. He moves very slowly. In recent years, he has been seen using a cane to walk when he is not on stage. He also battled prostate cancer secretly for a while. He underwent surgery and treatments that took a lot of energy out of him. The fact that he is still singing is a miracle. But physically, he is a frail, older man. The leather outfits now hang a bit looser on his frame. Watching him struggle to get on the motorcycle during shows makes fans hold their breath, hoping he doesn't fall. He is a survivor, but the invincible metal god image has been replaced by a kind, elderly grandfather figure. Rob Halford rode motorcycles, but the singer for Iron Maiden flies actual airplanes. You would think a pilot would stay in perfect health, but a sudden cancer diagnosis nearly took his voice and his life. 9. Bruce Dickinson. Bruce Dickinson is a man of many talents. He sings. For Iron Maiden, he is a champion fencer, and he is a commercial airline pilot. For decades, he was known as the Air Raid Siren because his voice was so loud and clear. He was an athlete on stage, running and jumping over monitors without missing a beat. But in 2015, Bruce got some terrifying news. He was diagnosed with throat cancer. He had a tumor the size of a golf ball on his tongue. That is a wow factor that makes you cringe. For a singer, that is the worst possible place to get sick. The treatment involved radiation and chemotherapy. It was brutal on his body. He lost a lot of weight and looked very gaunt and gray for a while. His face aged 10 years in just a few months. While he beat the cancer and is back on stage at 65, he looks different. His face has more lines and his hair is thin and gray. He sometimes struggles with the very high notes that used to be easy for him. He has to pace himself more. The endless energy is a bit lower now. He is happy to be alive, but the cancer scare took away that youthful invincibility he carried for so long. Bruce flew high, but the drummer for Motley Crue wanted to go even higher. He built roller coasters for his drum kit, but all those stunts left his body broken and battered. 10. Tommy Lee. Tommy Lee lived the wildest life of anyone on the Sunset Strip. As the drummer for Motley Crue, he was tall, skinny, and handsome. He was famous for his chaotic love life and his crazy stunts. He would play drums while spinning upside down in a cage. He was pure adrenaline. But adrenaline fades. Tommy is now 62, and his body is paying the price for all those stunts. He has admitted that his knees are completely shot from pounding the kick drum for 40 years. He has had surgeries on his hands and fingers. Visually, Tommy looks rough. He has spent a lifetime in the sun and partying, and his skin shows it. He looks very leathery. He is still thin, but in a way that looks fragile. He recently broke his ribs just before a huge stadium tour and had to sit out for some of the shows. The idea that Tommy Lee has to sit out because of fragile bones is something nobody in 1985 would have believed. He tries to act like he is still 20, but his body is clearly telling him he is a senior citizen. Tommy Lee partied hard, but the guitarist from Kiss took the party to a whole other level. He was known as the Spaceman, but when the makeup came off, the damage was shocking. 11. Ace Frehley. Ace Frehley was the coolest member of Kiss. He was the Spaceman. He played the guitar with smoke coming out of it. He had a mysterious vibe. But behind the scenes, Ace was drinking and using powders more than anyone else. He was known for crashing cars and missing flights. When Ace finally left the band and showed his real face without the white makeup, fans were stunned. The years of hard living had swollen his face. He had lost teeth and needed extensive dental work to fix his smile. At 74, he often looks confused during interviews. His speech can be slow and slurred. He moves very stiffly. He has a look of permanent surprise on his face, likely due to some cosmetic procedures trying to fix the damage. He is a legend, but he looks like he aged 20 years for every 10 years that passed. Comparing photos of young Ace to current Ace is one of the most drastic changes in rock history. The Spaceman looks like he crash-landed a long time ago. Ace was a guitar hero, but the original singer of Van Halen was the ultimate showman. He used to do karate kicks in midair, but now he has become a strange, quiet version of his former self. 12. David Lee Roth, Diamond Dave. In the 80s, David Lee Roth was a fitness fanatic. He had a perfect tan, long blonde mane, and muscles everywhere. He would do splits off the drum riser. He was the most energetic frontman in the world. He was loud, colorful, and brash. Today, David Lee Roth is 70 years old, and the transformation is startling. He is completely bald on top with long hair on the sides, which is a look that confuses many fans. He has become very thin and frail-looking. The muscles are gone. He recently announced his retirement, saying that his doctors told him his time is limited. He hinted at health issues without being specific. Seeing him on stage in his final shows was tough. He couldn't do the kicks anymore. His voice was cracked and strained. He would often forget lyrics or ramble on about strange topics between songs. The golden god of California rock turned into a quiet, fragile old man very quickly. It feels like the party finally ended for Dave. David Lee Roth is slowing down, but the guitarist for Motley Crue is fighting a disease that is literally turning his own skeleton against him. 13. Mick Mars. Mick Mars was always the quiet one in Motley Crue. He was the older guy in the band, the mysterious figure in the top hat. But the thing nobody tells you is that Mick has been suffering from a horrible disease called ankylosing spondylitis since he was a teenager. This is a condition where the bones in the spine fuse together. Over the decades, this has caused Mick to physically shrink. He is now at least 3 inches shorter than he was in his prime. That is a terrifying fact. His body is bent forward, making it impossible for him to turn his head. Now, at 73, Mick looks almost like a ghost. He is incredibly pale and thin. He recently had to stop touring completely because the pain was too much. He even sued his bandmates, claiming they were trying to cut him out because of his illness. It is a sad ending. While the other guys were partying, Mick was in constant physical agony. Seeing photos of him now, hunched over and frail, shows just how much pain he endured to keep the music playing. Mick fought through pain, but our next legend fought a sudden battle with his stomach that took him from us far too soon. He was small in stature, but had the biggest voice in metal. 14. Ronnie James Dio. Ronnie James Dio was a wizard. He sang for Rainbow, Black Sabbath, and his own band, Dio. He popularized the devil horns hand gesture. He was a small man, but he stood 10 feet tall on stage. He had a curly mane of hair and a voice that never seemed to age. Even in his 60s, he sounded amazing. But in 2009, things changed fast. Ronnie started complaining of stomach pains. He was diagnosed with stomach cancer. The decline was rapid and shocking. In just a few months, he lost a massive amount of weight. His face became skeletal. Photos taken just weeks before he passed away in 2010 show a man who had aged 20 years in 6 months. His skin was yellowed, and he looked incredibly weak. It was hard for fans to see the man who sang about dragons and magic looking so mortal. He passed away at 67. While he didn't have a long, slow decline like some others, the sudden shock of his illness showed how quickly health can be stolen away. Ronnie left us too early, but the frontman of Kiss is still here, though he seems to be fighting aging with every dollar he has. The result, however, is a face that doesn't quite look real anymore. 15. Paul Stanley. Paul Stanley is the star child. He is the one who talks to the crowd at Kiss concerts. For decades, he was known for his hairy chest, his dancing, and his incredible vocal range. He was the S symbol of the band. He prided himself on his looks, but Paul is now 73, and he has not accepted aging gracefully. There are many rumors and observations that he has had a lot of plastic surgery. His face often looks tight and frozen. His eyebrows seem permanently surprised. It is that uncanny valley look where someone tries so hard to look young that they end up looking strange. Worse than his looks is his voice. The high notes are completely gone. He often sounds raspy and struggles to speak clearly. There have been accusations that he uses backing tracks to lip sync during concerts because he simply cannot sing the songs anymore. He also suffers from hearing loss from 50 years of loud explosions. Seeing the star child struggle to be the golden god he once was is a bit uncomfortable. He is fighting nature, and nature is winning. Paul Stanley hides behind surgery, but his bandmate Gene Simmons hides behind a mask of paint. But when the demon makeup comes off, the reality of a 75-year-old man is impossible to ignore. 16. Gene Simmons. Gene Simmons is the demon. He breathes fire, spits blood, and sticks out his incredibly long tongue. He is a marketing genius who claims to have slept with thousands of women. He built an empire on being a monster. On stage, Covered in armor and makeup, he looks the same as he did in 1976. But catch Gene without the makeup, and it is a different story. He is 75 years old. His face is heavy and sagging. He has developed prominent jowls. He dyes his hair jet black, but it looks unnatural and stiff. On stage, the heavy armor takes a toll. In recent years, Gene has had dizzy spells during shows. He has had to sit down or stop playing because the heat and the weight of his costume are too much for his heart. He once fell backwards on stage and couldn't get up like a turtle on its back because his gear was so heavy. It was a funny moment, but also a sad sign that the demon is just an old man in a costume. He has finally retired the band, likely because his body simply cannot carry the weight of the legend anymore. Gene's armor is heavy, but the next guitarist carries a different kind of weight. He was the young, blonde, pretty boy for Ozzy, but now he looks like a mountain man who has lived in the woods for a decade. 17. Zakk Wylde. When Zakk Wylde first joined Ozzy's band in the late 80s, he was a clean-shaven, blonde kid with high cheekbones. He looked like a model. He played guitar with a ferocious energy. He was the new blood that Ozzy needed. Fast forward to today, and Zakk Wylde is unrecognizable. He is 58, but he looks like a Viking who traveled through time. He has grown a massive, unruly beard that covers his entire face. He gained a lot of muscle and weight, transforming his body completely. But the lifestyle hit him hard too. Zakk was a legendary drinker. He could outdrink anyone, but this led to him developing serious blood clots in his legs and lungs. It was a life-threatening situation. His doctor told him that if he didn't stop the liquid habits, he would die. He had to give up the bottle entirely. Now he is sober, but the years of abuse left him looking weathered. He walks with a heavy stomp, and you can see the toll the road has taken on his joints. The pretty boy is gone, replaced by a grizzled survivor. Zakk changed his look on purpose, but the frontman for Sepultura had life force the change upon him. Tragedy and stress turned a young thrasher into a gray, weary elder. 18. Max Cavalera. Max Cavalera founded Sepultura in Brazil. He was a young, angry kid with wild hair and a raw voice. He changed the face of heavy metal in the 90s with the album Roots. He was full of fire and rebellion. But Max's life has been filled with tragedy. His father passed away young, and his stepson died in a tragic accident. The stress of band breakups and family loss hit him hard. Today, at 54, Max looks much older than his age. He has gained a significant amount of weight. His hair is gray and matted into a single, massive dreadlock that he has been growing for decades. It looks heavy and painful. His beard is gray and white. He often looks out of breath on stage. He has the vibe of a shaman, or a monk now, rather than a rock star. The fire is still there in his music, but his eyes look tired. He carries the weight of the world on his shoulders, and you can see it in every picture. Max carries emotional weight, but the singer of Slayer carries actual metal in his body. His head-banging style was so violent that he had to retire to a farm to save his own neck. 19. Tom Araya. Tom Araya was the voice of Slayer. For 30 years, he did something called the helicopter headbang. He would spin his long hair in a circle at incredible speeds while screaming about war and hell. It was his signature move. He was a beast on stage. But the human neck is not a propeller. The damage accumulated over the years. In 2010, Tom had to undergo major surgery. Doctors inserted a titanium plate into his neck to fuse his vertebrae. They told him he could never headbang again. If he did, he could be paralyzed. This changed everything. Tom had to stand still on stage. He looked uncomfortable like a caged animal. He gained weight and his beard turned snow white. He looked less like a metal singer and more like a kindly grandfather. In 2019, at the age of 58, he decided to retire Slayer. He said he just couldn't do it anymore. He moved to a farm in Texas to raise animals and live a quiet life. The man who screamed about raining blood is now a quiet farmer because his body simply gave out. Tom found peace on a farm, but our final star had to look death in the face to change his ways. He is the king of horror metal, but a massive heart attack nearly ended his reign forever. 20. King Diamond. King Diamond is famous for his falsetto voice and his black and white face paint. He tells ghost stories in his songs. He is a theatrical legend. For years, he was a heavy smoker. He was never seen without a cigarette. He lived a very unhealthy lifestyle while touring the world. In 2010, the king collapsed. He had a massive series of heart attacks. He was rushed to the hospital and had to undergo a triple bypass surgery. He was technically dead for a few moments. It was a terrifying wake-up call. Now, at 68, King Diamond is a stroke survivor. He has lost a lot of weight and looks very fragile without the makeup. He walks with a cane sometimes off stage. He had to relearn how to breathe and sing after his chest was cracked open. He completely changed his life, giving up the bad habits. When you see him now, he puts on a great show, but you know that underneath the paint is a man who is lucky to be standing there. He is a walking medical miracle, held together by modern science and sheer will, and sheer will, and sheer will, and sheer will. Behind the screaming guitars and pyrotechnics, some of rock's biggest names were hiding some truly dark secrets. We're pulling back the curtain on the controversies they thought were long forgotten. From backstage fights that ended careers to a shocking plan that landed a singer in prison. You won't believe what they did. 1. Ozzy Osbourne and the Bat. Many people are crazy about Ozzy Osbourne. He's known as the Prince of Darkness and the godfather of heavy metal. His work with Black Sabbath and as a solo artist created a whole new sound. But not all things are what they seem, and his reputation for being wild isn't just an act. One of the most famous stories about him is so bizarre it sounds completely made up. But the thing nobody tells you is, it really happened. On January 20th, 1982, Ozzy was performing a sold-out show in Des Moines, Iowa. The crowd was going wild, and as part of the show, fans would often throw things on stage. Usually it was fake bats or other spooky toys. On this night, a real live bat was thrown onto the stage. You see, Ozzy, thinking it was a rubber toy, picked it up and, in a moment of pure showmanship, bit its head off. It was only when he felt the warm liquid and the crunch that he realized something was terribly wrong. This is why this is huge. The incident became a global headline. It cemented his image as the craziest man in rock and roll. To put it mildly, the aftermath was not fun for Ozzy. He had to be rushed to the hospital immediately after the show to begin a painful series of rabies shots. What many overlooked is that the bat itself was taken for testing, but the results were never conclusive. The story became a legend, a shocking moment that Ozzy himself tried to downplay for years as just a crazy mistake. This stunt set a new bar for shocking stage behavior, but another rock star's actions off stage would have far more tragic and lasting consequences. 2. Vince Neil and the tragic car crash. In the 1980s, Motley Crue was on top of the world. They were the kings of the Sunset Strip, famous for their loud music, big hair, and even bigger parties. The band, especially frontman Vince Neil, was known for living a life of pure excess. Their motto seemed to be, live fast, but that lifestyle came with a terrible price that would haunt them forever. On December 8, 1984, the band was at a party at Vince Neil's home in Redondo Beach, California. They ran out of refreshments, so Neil and his friend, a musician named Razzle from the band Hanoi Rocks, decided to make a quick trip to the store. What many overlooked is that both men had been celebrating heavily all day. Neil got behind the wheel of his fancy sports car, a red De Tomaso Pantera, and sped down the wet streets. Tragedy struck just moments later. Neil lost control of the car, swerving into oncoming traffic and colliding with another vehicle. The impact was devastating. Razzle was lost in the crash, and the two people in the other car suffered severe injuries. This is why this is huge. The event sent shockwaves through the rock community. To put it mildly, the legal consequences were surprisingly light. Neil was charged with serious crimes, but ended up serving only about 19 days in jail and paying a fine. Many felt that his celebrity status got him a lenient sentence. The band tried to move past it, but the shadow of that night followed them, a dark reminder of a party that ended in the most heartbreaking way possible. A rock star facing legal trouble was nothing new. But our next story involves a band that was put on trial not for their actions, but for the music itself. 3. Judas Priest and the Subliminal Message Trial. Judas Priest is one of the most important bands in heavy metal history. With their leather and studs look and their twin guitar attack, they helped define the genre in the late 1970s and 80s. They were known for powerful songs and epic live shows. But in 1990, they found themselves in a courtroom, fighting for their career and their reputation against some very serious accusations. The whole thing started in 1985 when two young men in Reno, Nevada made a tragic choice that ended their lives. Their parents, grieving and looking for answers, filed a lawsuit against Judas Priest. They claimed that the band's album, Stained Class, contained hidden subliminal messages that had influenced the young men. Specifically, they pointed to the song Better by You, Better Than Me, claiming that when played backward, it contained the phrase, "Do it." This is why this is huge. The trial became a media circus. It was the peak of the Satanic Panic era, a time when many people were afraid of heavy metal music and its supposed evil influence. The band had to go to court and defend their art. They explained that any backward sounds were just accidental studio noises. Rob Halford, the band's singer, even played different songs in court to show how any recording could sound like something else when played backward. To put it mildly, it was a bizarre and stressful time for the band. After a long trial, the judge finally ruled in their favor, stating that there was no evidence that they had intentionally placed subliminal messages in their music. The band tried to hide their frustration, but the scandal left a permanent mark. The idea of a band influencing their fans was at the heart of that trial. But the next scandal on our list was caused by a frontman who influenced his fans in a much more direct and destructive way. 4. Axl Rose and the St. Louis Riot. Guns N' Roses was the most dangerous band in the world in the late 80s and early 90s. Led by their unpredictable and fiery frontman, Axl Rose, their concerts were legendary for being chaotic, wild, and often starting hours late. Axl was known for his incredible voice and his short temper. On July 2, 1991, that temper exploded in a way that led to a full-blown riot. The band was playing a show at the Riverport Amphitheater near St. Louis, Missouri. The concert was part of their massive Use Your Illusion tour. During the song Rocket Queen, Axl spotted someone in the crowd with a camera. Back then, unauthorized recording was a huge issue for bands. You see, Axl pointed out the person to security, but he felt they weren't acting fast enough. So he decided to take matters into his own hands. In a move that shocked everyone, he announced, "Well, thanks to the lame brain security, I'm going home," and then dove headfirst into the crowd. He went after the person with the camera, got into a scuffle, was pulled back on stage by the crew, and then promptly grabbed his microphone, slammed it on the stage, and walked off. The rest of the band followed, and the show was over. The crowd of over 20,000 people was furious. They had waited for the band, and now they felt cheated. Their anger boiled over, and they began to riot. They tore up seats, smashed equipment, and set fires. The damages were estimated to be over $200,000, and dozens of people were injured. Axl Rose was charged with inciting a riot, and the band was banned from St. Louis for years. They tried to blame the venue's security, but everyone knew whose tantrum had lit the fuse. Axl's outburst caused chaos for one night, but in the frozen landscape of Norway, a different kind of musical chaos was brewing, one that would have much darker and more permanent consequences. 5. The Norwegian black metal scene and its dark actions. In the early 1990s, a new and extreme form of heavy metal was born in the cold, dark winters of Norway. It was called black metal, and it was faster, harsher, and had a much darker message than anything that had come before. Bands like Mayhem, Burzum, and Emperor were at the center of this new scene. But what started as a musical movement quickly spiraled into something much more sinister. What many overlooked is that this small, tight-knit group of young musicians was not just playing music about darkness and anti-Christian ideas, they were living it. You see, they wanted to spread fear and chaos. This led to a series of shocking acts that made international headlines. The most famous of these were the church burnings. Between 1992 and 1996, over 50 historic wooden churches in Norway were set on fire, and many were completely destroyed. Some of these churches were hundreds of years old, beautiful landmarks that were priceless pieces of Norwegian history. This is why this is huge. Members of the black metal scene were directly responsible for many of these fires. They saw it as a symbolic act, a war against Christianity, and a way to bring back the old pagan spirit of their ancestors. But the darkness didn't stop there. The scene was also plagued by internal conflicts and violence. The most infamous event was the passing of Mayhem's guitarist, known as Euronymous, at the hands of another musician, Varg Vikernes of Burzum. The whole scene tried to frame their actions as part of a philosophical war, but to the rest of the world, it was a shocking and destructive crime spree that left a beautiful country scarred. The actions in Norway were driven by a dark ideology, but sometimes a scandal can erupt from a single, thoughtless moment on stage, as one famous frontman learned the hard way. 6. Phil Anselmo and the White Power Outburst. Phil Anselmo is a legendary figure in heavy metal. As the frontman for Pantera, his powerful voice and intense stage presence helped the band become one of the biggest metal acts of the 1990s. After Pantera, he stayed active with other bands like Down and Superjoint Ritual. He has always been a controversial figure, known for his aggressive attitude. But in 2016, his actions at a tribute concert caused a massive scandal that he still hasn't fully lived down. The event was the Dime Bash, an annual concert held in Hollywood to honor his late Pantera bandmate, Dimebag Darrell. Anselmo was one of the headliners, performing Pantera songs with other famous musicians. At the end of the night, as he was walking off stage, he gave what appeared to be a Nazi salute to the crowd and shouted the words, "White Power." The moment was caught on video by multiple fans in the audience, and it went viral almost instantly. The backlash was immediate and fierce. Fans, fellow musicians, and concert promoters condemned his actions. To put it mildly, his initial excuse did not help. He claimed it was an inside joke about drinking white wine backstage and that he was just being silly. Nobody bought it. The gesture and the words were too ugly and had too much history behind them. This is why this is huge. In the following days, he was dropped from festival appearances, and many of his peers in the music world publicly criticized him. He eventually released a more serious apology, admitting he was wrong and that his actions were offensive. He tried to hide behind a bad joke, but the scandal exposed a dark side that many had long suspected. Anselmo was accused of promoting hate. Our next star was also linked to a terrible event, but in his case, he was unfairly blamed for a national tragedy. 7. Marilyn Manson and the Columbine accusations. Marilyn Manson built his entire career on being shocking. With his ghoulish makeup, industrial metal sound, and lyrics that challenged religion and authority, he became one of the most controversial figures of the late 1990s. He was the artist that parents loved to hate, and he was a hero to rebellious teenagers everywhere. But on April 20th, 1999, his carefully crafted world of shock rock came crashing into a real-world nightmare. That was the day of the Columbine High School tragedy, where 2 students carried out a horrific attack on their classmates and teachers. In the confusing and emotional aftermath, a nation was desperate for answers. People wanted to know what could possibly motivate such a terrible act. And very quickly, the media and cultural critics found a scapegoat, Marilyn Manson. Early reports, which later turned out to be completely false, claimed that the 2 young men were big fans of his music. The story spread like wildfire. Pundits on the news declared that Manson's dark and violent imagery had poisoned their minds. This is why this is huge. He became the public face of everything that was supposedly wrong with youth culture. He received threats, his concerts were protested and canceled, and he was blamed for the tragedy by politicians and religious leaders. The thing nobody tells you is the 2 individuals involved in the incident were not actually fans of his. In fact, they reportedly disliked his music. But the truth didn't matter. Manson was an easy target. He tried to defend himself, even writing a famous essay for Rolling Stone magazine about the dangers of blame and media sensationalism. But for a long time, his name was unfairly tied to one of the darkest days in modern American history. Manson was targeted for his image. For our next rock star, his controversial image came from a very personal and strange hobby he refused to apologize for. 8. Lemmy Kilmister and his controversial collection. Lemmy Kilmister was the definition of a rock and roll outlaw. As the frontman of Motorhead, with his gravelly voice, thunderous bass playing, and iconic mutton chops, he was a true original. He lived life on his own terms, and he didn't care what anyone thought about it. But one of his personal interests, a lifelong hobby, created a scandal that followed him throughout his career. You see, Lemmy was an avid collector of historical military memorabilia. That in itself isn't unusual, but what made his collection so controversial was his focus on items from Nazi Germany. What many overlooked is that this wasn't just a few items tucked away in a box. He had a massive collection that filled his Los Angeles apartment. It included flags, daggers, medals, and even uniforms from the Third Reich. He would often be photographed with pieces from his collection and even wore an Iron Cross necklace as part of his signature look. Naturally, this led to accusations that he was a Nazi sympathizer. To put it mildly, Lemmy always found these accusations ridiculous. In countless interviews, he tried to explain his position. He would say that he didn't agree with the Nazi ideology at all. He just thought that the bad guys in history always had the coolest uniforms. He saw the items purely as historical artifacts and design objects. This is why this is huge. He insisted that collecting the items didn't mean he supported the terrible things the Nazis did. But many people couldn't separate the symbols from the history. It remained a controversial part of his legacy, a scandal that he never tried to hide but always had to defend. Lemmy's scandal was about symbols from the past. Our next band created a scandal with a song inspired by a very recent and very disturbing true story. 9. Rammstein and the cannibal-inspired song. The German industrial metal band Rammstein is famous for pushing the limits. Their live shows are legendary spectacles of fire and theatrics, and their music videos are often like mini horror movies. They have never been afraid to tackle dark and disturbing subjects in their songs. But in 2004, they released a song and video that was so shocking. It was based on a true story that was almost too horrifying to believe. The song was called Mein Teil, which translates to My Part. It was directly inspired by the bizarre and gruesome case of Armin Meiwes, a German man who had found a volunteer online who agreed to be dispatched and then consumed. It was a story that had shocked the entire world with its sheer depravity. And Rammstein decided to write a song about it. The lyrics were written from the perspective of the victim, and the music video was a surreal and disturbing masterpiece. It featured the band singer Till Lindemann in a chef's hat, chasing the other band members through a dark, grimy setting. The thing nobody tells you is that the video was so intense that it was often only shown on television after 10 o'clock at night in Germany. This is why this is huge. The song caused a massive controversy. Critics accused the band of glorifying a horrific act. They were accused of being tasteless and trying to profit from a real-life tragedy. The band, in their typical fashion, defended the song as art. They argued that they weren't celebrating the event, but were exploring the darkest corners of human nature. They tried to hide behind the idea of artistic freedom, but for many, the song and video crossed a line from shocking to just plain sick. Rammstein was accused of being a bad influence, but in the 80s, a whole group of bands faced that accusation, leading to a showdown in the halls of the U.S. government. 10. Dee Snider and the War Against Censorship. In the mid-1980s, heavy metal was ruling the airwaves, and MTV was in nearly every home. Bands like Twisted Sister were huge stars, with their catchy anthems and rebellious, makeup-clad image. Their song, We're Not Gonna Take It, was a massive hit. But a powerful group of people in Washington, D.C. were not fans. They thought the music was a corrupting influence on America's youth, and they decided to do something about it. This group was called the Parents Music Resource Center, or the PMRC. It was co-founded by Tipper Gore, the wife of then-Senator Al Gore. They created a list of 15 songs they found to be the most offensive, which they called the Filthy 15. On that list were songs by rock and metal giants like Judas Priest, Motley Crue, and Twisted Sister. They claimed these songs were promoting violence and other bad behaviors. This is why this is huge. The PMRC's campaign led to a famous Senate hearing in 1985. They wanted to create a rating system for music, similar to what existed for movies. The music industry sent 3 musicians to testify against the proposal: Frank Zappa, John Denver, and most surprisingly, Dee Snider of Twisted Sister. What many overlooked is that the senators probably expected a cartoon character to show up. Instead, they got a well-spoken and intelligent man who fiercely defended his music and the freedom of speech. Dressed in his rock gear, he read from a prepared statement, tearing apart the PMRC's arguments. He explained that his songs were about rebellion, not violence, and that the group had completely misinterpreted his lyrics. Although his speech was powerful, the record industry eventually caved and agreed to put the now famous Parental Advisory Explicit Content stickers on albums. Dee Snider tried to hide his disappointment, but he had fought the good fight against censorship. Dee Snider fought against powerful people in Washington. Our next rock star's scandal involved a secret plan against the most important person in his own life. 11. Tim Lambesis and his shocking plan. As I Lay Dying was one of the biggest bands in the 2000s metalcore scene. With their blend of heavy riffs and melodic choruses, they sold millions of albums and played for huge crowds all over the world. The band was also known for being openly Christian, which made them stand out in the metal world. Their singer, Tim Lambesis, was the face of the band. But in 2013, a shocking secret was revealed that showed a much darker side to the frontman. What many overlooked is that Lambesis' personal life was falling apart. His marriage was ending, and he was reportedly very upset that his wife was going to get a large portion of his income and custody of their children. He was also going through a crisis of faith, later admitting he no longer believed in the Christian ideals the band promoted. He was in a dark place, and he made a terrible decision. This is why this is huge. Lambesis decided he wanted his wife out of the picture permanently. He asked a personal trainer at his gym if he knew anyone who could help him with his situation. The trainer was so alarmed that he contacted the police. The authorities set up a sting operation. They had an undercover detective pose as a hitman named Red. Lambesis met with the undercover officer and was recorded giving him an envelope with $1,000 cash as a down payment, along with his wife's address and the security codes to her home. He was immediately arrested. To put it mildly, the news was a bombshell that stunned the music world. The singer of a Christian metal band had tried to have his wife taken out. He tried to blame his actions on a heavy use of steroids, but he eventually pleaded guilty and was sentenced to 6 years in prison. Tim Lambesis' story was a shocking fall from grace, but our next tale of rock and roll excess involves a legendary band and a story so wild it has become the stuff of myth. 12. Led Zeppelin and the Edgewater Inn story. Led Zeppelin was the biggest band in the world in the 1970s. They were like gods of rock, traveling the globe in their private jet, the Starship, and leaving a trail of sold-out stadiums and trashed hotel rooms in their wake. They were famous for their legendary parties and outrageous behavior. But one story from a stop in Seattle in 1969 is so infamous that it has become the ultimate tale of rock and roll debauchery. The band was staying at the Edgewater Inn, a hotel famous because you could fish directly out of your hotel room window into Elliott Bay. After a show, the band and their entourage threw a massive party that lasted for days. What happened at that party has been the subject of rumors and whispers for over 50 years. The most famous and scandalous part of the story involves the band, some groupies, and a fish caught from that hotel window. The thing nobody tells you is that the details are very murky, and the story has likely been exaggerated over the years. But the generally accepted version involves some very inappropriate and bizarre acts with the sea creature. To put it mildly, it was an extreme example of the wild and lawless behavior that was common in the rock scene at the time. This is why this is huge. The band's manager, Peter Grant, was furious when he found out. He reportedly paid a lot of money to make sure the story didn't get out and damage the band's image. For years, the band and its members denied it ever happened, trying to hide one of the most shocking and weird scandals in music history. It remains a legendary, if disturbing, piece of rock folklore. That story involved a fish. Our next scandal also involves an animal on stage, but this time, the rock star claimed it was all a big misunderstanding. 13. Alice Cooper and the Chicken Incident. Before Marilyn Manson, there was Alice Cooper. In the early 1970s, he was the king of shock rock. His concerts were like a vaudeville horror show, complete with guillotines, fake blood, and a live boa constrictor. He was a master of creating controversy and getting headlines. But at the Toronto Rock and Roll Revival Festival in 1969, an unplanned moment with a feathered friend created a scandal that defined his career. During his band's set, someone in the audience threw a live chicken onto the stage. You see, Alice Cooper, being a city kid from Detroit, had never been around farm animals. He said later that he saw the chicken, noticed it had wings, and figured it could fly. So he picked it up and tossed it back into the air, expecting it to soar gracefully over the crowd. It did not fly. Instead, the chicken dropped straight down into the front rows of the audience. What happened next is a bit grim. The crowd, which included many people in wheelchairs who were placed at the front, allegedly tore the poor bird to pieces. The next day, the headlines were wild. They screamed, "Alice Cooper bites head off chicken and drinks its blood." This is why this is huge. The story was completely false, but it was so shocking that everyone believed it. His manager, Shep Gordon, advised him not to deny it. He saw the power in the scandal. The incident, as grotesque as it was, made Alice Cooper a household name and an icon of rebellion. He tried to explain the misunderstanding for years, but the legend was more powerful than the truth. Alice Cooper's scandal was an accident that he embraced. Our next musician scandals were no accident, as his career has been marked by constant trouble with the law. 14. Ronnie Radke and his run-ins with the law. Ronnie Radke has been one of the most talked about and controversial figures in the rock scene for the last 2 decades. As the original singer for Escape the Fate and the current frontman for Falling in Reverse, he is known for his unique vocal style and his confrontational personality. But many people are crazy about him for another reason: his seemingly endless string of legal problems. The trouble started back in 2006. Radke was involved in a fight in Las Vegas that led to the tragic passing of a young man named Michael Cook. While Radke did not directly cause the young man's end, he was charged with battery for his role in the altercation. This is why this is huge. He was given probation, but he failed to report to his parole officer, which was a serious violation. A warrant was issued for his arrest, and in 2008, he was taken into custody and sentenced to 2.5 years in prison. This led to him being fired from his band, Escape the Fate. After his release from prison, he formed a new band, Falling in Reverse, and it seemed like he might be on a new path. But the controversy was far from over. To put it mildly, his troubles continued. In 2012, he was accused of being involved in a domestic incident with his then-girlfriend. Later in 2014, he was in the news again when he threw microphone stands into the crowd at a concert, injuring several fans. He has consistently tried to downplay his actions, blaming his anger issues and a tough upbringing, but the pattern of behavior created a scandal that has defined his career just as much as his music. Ronnie Radke's career was derailed by his personal demons. The next story is about a rock star whose personal demons almost ended his story for good. 15. Nikki Sixx and his famous near-pass experience. Motley Crue's entire career was one long scandal, and they documented most of it in their tell-all book, The Dirt. But of all the wild stories of excess and destruction, none is more shocking than the night their bassist, Nikki Sixx, actually passed away for 2 full minutes. The date was December 23, 1987. The band was in the middle of a wild tour, and their unhealthy habits were at an all-time high. After a show, Sixx went back to a hotel with some friends and indulged in a dangerous mix of substances. He overdosed, and his heart stopped. To put it mildly, the situation was grim. Paramedics arrived and found him without a pulse. He was declared to be gone. But here's where the story takes a turn that is pure rock and roll legend. One of the paramedics happened to be a big Motley Crue fan. Unwilling to give up, he gave Sixx 2 shots of adrenaline directly into his heart. Miraculously, it worked. Sixx's heart started beating again, and he was rushed to the hospital. This is why this is huge. The story gets even crazier. A few hours later, Sixx woke up in the hospital, ripped the tubes out of his nose, and walked out of the building. He hitched a ride home from two crying teenage fans who were holding a candlelight vigil for him in the parking lot. The very next day, he wrote the lyrics to one of the band's biggest hits, "Kickstart My Heart," inspired by the event. The band initially tried to keep the details quiet, but the story was too wild not to tell. What if you were the first? The very first band of your kind to kick down the doors and prove that your style of music could be a force to be reckoned with. You'd think that would make you legends forever. But for one all-female band, being pioneers wasn't enough to keep them in the spotlight. Their story and the stories of 19 other metal bands who blazed brightly for a moment are a lesson in how cruel the music business can be. 1. Grim Reaper. When you decide to name your band Grim Reaper, you are making a promise. You are telling the world that your music is going to be dark, heavy, and maybe a little bit scary. And believe me, this band from England delivered on that promise. Their most famous song from back in 1983 was called "See You in Hell." It was pure, simple, and powerful heavy metal. The whole thing was led by their singer, Steve Grimmett, a man whose voice was like an air raid siren, wailing and screaming with incredible power. The guitar riffs were simple but menacing, and the whole song just made you want to bang your head. The music video for the song was a classic for its time. It was made on a shoestring budget and showed the band rocking out in an old church, complete with spooky smoke machines and dramatic lighting. It was the perfect visual for their sound. The song was so good that it actually managed to get on the rock radio charts in America. That was a big deal for a British band that was this heavy. But here's the kicker. While hardcore metal fans loved them, their sound was just too raw and gritty for the mainstream. At the time, TV was being taken over by slicker, more polished bands with big hair and colorful clothes. Grim Reaper was the opposite of that. They were dark and noisy. To make matters worse, they had a lot of problems with their record company. These business issues made it really hard for them to release new music and tour properly. They were stuck. By the late 1980s, the band just fizzled out. They left behind one perfect heavy metal anthem, a true calling card for a band that was too real for the pop world. Grim Reaper was too raw for the mainstream. But our next band had the opposite problem. They had a tough guy image and a powerful sound, but they got squeezed out by two other styles of music that exploded at the same time. 2. Armored Saint. Long before the super-fast thrash metal scene took over California, the city of Los Angeles had a different kind of metal. It was tougher, grittier, and more down-to-earth. And the kings of that scene were a band called Armored Saint. They were fronted by a singer named John Bush, who had a powerful, commanding voice that sounded like he was leading an army into battle. Their song, "Can You Deliver," from 1984, was a perfect example of their sound. It was a challenge thrown down to the listener, a heavy metal anthem for the working man. The song was a powerhouse, and it got a lot of airplay on rock radio stations. It seemed like Armored Saint was on the verge of becoming huge. They had the look, the sound, and an incredible live show. But they had some seriously bad timing. Just as they were starting to get popular, two other music scenes exploded around them. One was the super fast and aggressive thrash metal from the Bay Area. The other was the super flashy and popular glam metal from their own backyard on the Sunset Strip. Armored Saint was caught in the middle. They weren't quite as fast as the thrash bands, and they weren't as flashy as the glam bands. They were just tough, honest heavy metal. Sadly, that meant they got overlooked. They never had another song that did as well as "Can You Deliver." Their singer, John Bush, would later become famous as the lead singer for the thrash metal band Anthrax. But Armored Saint, his first band, remained a beloved legend of the underground, a band that could have been massive if things had gone just a little bit differently. Armored Saint was a band with a tough sound, but our next band was all about having fun, and their one big hit was a simple chant that became a stadium rock classic. Helix. Gimme an R. O-C-K. It was a simple spell, but it was powerful. With that one chant, a Canadian band named Helix created one of the most fun and catchy rock anthems of the entire 1980s. Their song, called Rock You, was a blast of pure, simple energy. It was not complicated music. It was loud, it was straightforward, and it was made to be screamed along to by thousands of people in a giant arena. And for a while, that's exactly what happened. The song became a huge hit on rock radio in the United States back in 1984. The video was all over TV. The band, with their high energy and simple message of rocking out, was a perfect fit for the time. They were all about having a good time. But that simple, fun style was also their biggest weakness. As the 80s went on, heavy metal started to change. Bands became more theatrical, with bigger stage shows and more complex music. Other bands became more aggressive and faster. Helix, with their straightforward meat and potatoes style of rock, started to seem a little old-fashioned. They were still huge stars in their home country of Canada, where they are still considered rock and roll royalty to this day. But in America, their fame was like a flashbulb. It was brilliant for a moment with Rock You, and then it was gone. Helix was all about simple, straightforward rock. Our next band was the total opposite, a group of musical wizards whose sound was so technical and complex that it may have been too smart for the radio. 4. Vicious Rumors. The San Francisco Bay Area in the 1980s was world famous for one thing: thrash metal. It was the home of fast, aggressive bands that changed the face of music. But right in the middle of all that, there was a band called Vicious Rumors that was doing something a little different. They took the power and speed of American power metal and blended it with the aggression of thrash. The result was a sound that was both incredibly powerful and amazingly technical. In 1988, they released a song called Don't Wait For Me. It was the perfect blend of their styles. It had a melody that was catchy enough for rock radio, but it was also packed with lightning-fast guitar solos and a pounding rhythm that pleased the hardcore metal fans. The song was a minor hit, getting played on the radio and showing the world what this band could do. The problem was, their music was maybe a little too impressive. The band was made up of incredible musicians who could play their instruments at a mind-boggling level. Their songs were often long and complex, with lots of changes in tempo and mood. While this made them a favorite among other musicians and serious metal fans, it was a bit too much for the average listener. They were too heavy and complicated for mainstream success. They continued to be a respected and powerful force in the underground metal world for decades, but they never again came close to having a hit on the charts. Vicious Rumors was a band that was maybe too skilled for their own good. Our next band also had a ton of talent, but they wrapped it in a spooky horror movie package that was just too weird for the mainstream. 5. Lizzie Borden. In the 1980s, rock and roll was all about putting on a show, and few bands put on a show as wild as Lizzie Borden. The band was named after the famous historical figure, and their lead singer also took that name for himself. Their whole act was based on horror movies and spooky theatrics. They used fake blood, axes, and all sorts of crazy props on stage. It was a shocking and exciting spectacle. In 1987, they released a song called Me Against the World. It was the perfect anthem for their defiant, rebellious image. It was a powerful song about standing up for yourself, and it had a chorus that was perfect for rock radio. The song became a hit, and for a moment, it seemed like Lizzie Borden was going to be the next big thing in shock rock. But truth be told, their act was just too intense for most people. The horror movie gimmick that got them noticed also limited their appeal. Radio stations were a little nervous about playing a band that was so over the top. While fans of heavy metal loved their energy and their wild stage show, parents and TV networks were not as enthusiastic. They quickly vanished from the charts, becoming a true cult band. They were a group that was too shocking and too strange to be anything other than an underground legend. Lizzie Borden's spooky American Horror Show was too much for the charts. Our next band came from across the ocean in Germany, and their one big hit was a perfect anthem that brought European metal to American shores, if only for a moment. 6. Warlock. Before she was known all over the world as the undisputed queen of metal, a German singer named Doro Pesch was the leader of a band called Warlock, and Warlock was a force of nature. Their song All We Are from 1987 is one of the greatest European metal anthems of all time. It's a song made for festivals with a powerful fist-in-the-air chorus that everyone can sing along to. Doro's voice was full of passion and power, and she immediately stood out as a major star. The song was so good that it crossed the Atlantic Ocean and became a hit on rock radio in the United States. It was a huge moment, introducing a lot of Americans to the powerful, melodic style of traditional German heavy metal. It seemed like Warlock was poised for an American invasion, but for some reason, their sound never fully caught on in the U.S. Maybe it was a little too European for American tastes at the time. Then, the band ran into serious legal problems over the rights to their own name. It was a messy business situation that forced the band to break up. Doro Pesch wisely decided to continue her career as a solo artist, and she became a huge star all over the world. But the band Warlock, the group that introduced her to America, had their one shining moment with All We Are, and then disappeared from the U.S. charts forever. Warlock brought German power to America for one song. Our next band was from England, and they were known for being so wild and energetic on stage that they had to invent a new name for their style of music. 7. Raven. Let's go back to the early 80s and the new wave of British heavy metal. This movement gave us some of the biggest metal bands of all time. And then there was Raven. This band from Newcastle, England, was different. They were so wild, so fast, and so energetic that they didn't think heavy metal was a good enough description for what they did. So they called their music athletic rock. And if you ever saw them play live, you would understand why. The three members of the band would run and jump all over the stage like crazy, all while playing incredibly fast and complex music. Their 1985 song, On and On, was a perfect snapshot of this chaotic energy. It was a blur of breakneck guitar riffs, a frantic bass line, and high-pitched vocals. The song was just polished enough that it managed to get some airplay on American rock radio. But let's be honest, this music was way too intense for most people. It was pure, unfiltered adrenaline. Raven ended up being a huge influence on the next generation of metal bands. The young musicians who were forming thrash metal bands like Metallica and Slayer looked up to Raven and were inspired by their speed and energy. But the band themselves were just too raw and too wild to stay in the mainstream spotlight. They were the pioneers who showed everyone else the way, but they were too far ahead of their time to reap the rewards. Raven was too fast for the world, but our next band was the opposite. They were all about slow, dramatic build-ups and epic stories, taking inspiration from the world of classical music. Sabotage. From the sunny state of Florida came a band that always thought on a grander scale. The band was called Sabotage, and they were not content to just write simple rock songs. They wanted to create epic musical journeys. They mixed the power of heavy metal with the drama and complexity of classical music and opera. Their songs were often long, theatrical stories. In 1987, they had a moment of pure genius. They took a very famous piece of classical music called In the Hall of the Mountain King by a composer named Edvard Grieg, and they turned it into a heavy metal masterpiece, and the song, which they called Hall of the Mountain King, was incredible. It kept the spooky, dramatic feeling of the original piece, but added heavy, powerful guitar riffs and a mind-blowing solo from their guitarist, the late, great Chris Oleva. The song was so unique and powerful that it became a hit on rock radio. It was unlike anything else being played at the time, but it was a double-edged sword. The very thing that made the song a hit, its ambition and complexity, was what kept the band from having another one. Their music was just too deep and too involved for the simple format of radio. Years later, the members of Sabotage would go on to form the Trans-Siberian Orchestra, which became one of the most successful musical acts in the world. But back when they were Sabotage, their one taste of mainstream chart success was this one epic classical metal creation. Sabotage turned a classical piece into a metal hit. Our next band also had their one big hit with a song that was different from the rest of their music, a dark and haunting ballad that came from the rainy city of Seattle. 9. Metal Church. Long before the city of Seattle, Washington became famous for grunge music, it had a thriving and powerful heavy metal scene. And one of the most important bands from that scene was Metal Church. As their name suggests, their music was a religion for them. They played a dark, powerful, and aggressive style of metal that was infused with the speed of thrash. Most of their songs were fast and heavy. That's why it was so surprising when their biggest hit, from 1986, was a power ballad. But this was not a typical happy love song. The song was called "Watch the Children Pray," and it was a dark, somber, and chilling piece of music. The song had a haunting melody and the raw, emotional vocals of their singer, David Wayne. It created a spooky atmosphere that really stood out on rock radio. It was a powerful and completely unexpected hit. But it was a one-time thing. The rest of Metal Church's music was way too heavy and aggressive for the mainstream. They were, and still are, revered by metal fans as true pioneers of the Seattle metal scene. But their one brief moment on the national charts was with this one dark, unforgettable ballad. Metal Church gave us a haunting ballad. Our next band gave us a song that was a simple, powerful love letter to heavy metal itself, created by a group of lovable underdogs from Canada. 10. Anvil. The story of the Canadian band Anvil is one of the most heartwarming in all of rock and roll. It is a story about never giving up on your dream, no matter what. These guys have been hammering out pure, honest, old-school heavy metal since the late 1970s. Their most famous song from 1982 is called "Metal on Metal." And the song is exactly what the title says it is. It is a simple, powerful, and totally sincere tribute to the genre of music that they love. With its chugging, powerful guitar riff and a chorus that was made to be shouted by a crowd of headbangers, the song became an anthem for metal fans in the underground. It was so good that it even managed to get some airplay on rock radio stations. But the band's gritty, no-frills style never really broke through to the big time. They were always a little too goofy and a little too real for the polished world of pop music. For decades, they kept playing, even when only a few people were listening. Then, in 2008, a documentary movie was made about them called Anvil, the Story of Anvil. The movie was a huge hit, and it told their funny and touching story to the whole world. It finally gave them the fame and recognition they had deserved for so long. But their time as a band with a song on the charts ended way back in 1982 with this one perfect tribute to metal. Anvil's love for metal gave them one hit. Our next band was also from Canada, and they were all about one thing: pure, blistering speed. 11. Exciter. When people talk about the fastest bands in the early days of metal, the Canadian band Exciter has to be in the conversation. They were one of the very first bands to play what would become known as speed metal. And their 1983 song, "Heavy Metal Maniac," was a mission statement. The song was a frantic, blistering assault on the senses. It featured raw-throated screams from their singing drummer, Dan Beehler, and guitar riffs that were played at a ridiculously high speed. It was pure musical adrenaline. The track was so wild and so ahead of its time that it actually got some notice from rock radio stations that were looking for something new and heavier. But you have to understand, this music was way too extreme for the average person in 1983. It was like listening to a jet engine taking off. Exciter ended up being a massive influence on the bands that came after them. The musicians who started the thrash metal scene were all listening to Exciter and trying to play as fast as they could. But the band itself was just too far ahead of the curve. They were too fast, too loud, and too raw to find any real mainstream success. They remain a true one-hit wonder of the metal underground, a band that lit the fuse for an explosion but didn't stick around for the party. Exciter was all about speed. Our next band had a more classic, swashbuckling style, and their one hit was a fun anthem about two of rock and roll's favorite things. 12. Riot. From the tough streets of New York City came a band called Riot. This was a band that could do a little bit of everything. They mixed the classic bluesy sound of hard rock with the epic melodic style of European power metal. And for some reason, their mascot was a strange-looking baby seal creature named Johnny. It was a weird mix, but it worked. Their one big hit came in 1981 with a song called Swords and Tequila. It was a perfect slice of their fun, high-energy style. It was a swashbuckling rock song with a killer guitar riff and a chorus that was just made for singing along to at a party. The song became a staple on rock radio and remains their only song to ever hit the U.S. charts. The band's biggest problem was that they could never keep a steady lineup. Their singers and other members changed constantly over the years. This made it really hard for them to build a consistent following. Their sound was always changing a little bit with each new member. They are still considered cult heroes by die-hard metal fans, but their one and only victory on the American charts was this one fun-filled battle cry. Riot's one hit was a party anthem. Our next band was from the same era, but they got lost in the crowd of one of the most important movements in metal history. 13. Tigers of Pan Tang. The new wave of British heavy metal in the early 1980s was an incredibly exciting time. There were dozens of amazing new bands coming out of England, all playing a new, faster, and more energetic style of metal. And right in the middle of this creative explosion was a band with a very cool name, Tigers of Pan Tang. Their 1981 song, Hellbound, was a perfect example of the NWOBHM sound. It was a galloping, fast-paced rocker with twin guitar harmonies and a powerful, melodic vocal. The song had all the right ingredients, and it was good enough to get some attention from rock radio stations in America. For a moment, it seemed like they might be one of the bands to break out from the pack. But they were hit with a classic rock and roll problem: lineup changes. The band went through several different singers in a very short period of time. Every time they seemed to be gaining some momentum, they would have to stop and find a new frontman. In a scene that was already incredibly crowded with talented bands, these kinds of problems were a death sentence. They just got lost in the shuffle. They were a great band with a killer song, but they couldn't overcome their internal issues to build on their one small success. The Tigers of Pan Tang got lost in the British metal explosion. Our next band was one of the biggest from that same scene, but their story in America is very, very different from their story in the rest of the world. 14. Saxon. This is one of the strangest stories in heavy metal. If you go to Europe, the band Saxon are gods. They are absolute legends who can headline giant music festivals and play to tens of thousands of people. But if you ask the average rock fan in the United States about them, they will probably only know one song. These pioneers of the new wave of British heavy metal are, in America, a one-hit wonder. That one hit was their 1980 classic, Wheels of Steel. It is a gritty, working-class heavy metal anthem about the freedom of the open road and the love of motorcycles. The song has a powerful, driving beat and the unmistakable voice of their singer, Biff Byford. It was a perfect rock song, and it became a hit on American radio. But for some strange reason, that's where their American success stopped. They had dozens of other amazing songs like Denim and Leather, Princess of the Night, and 747, Strangers in the Night, that were huge hits all over the world. But none of them ever made it onto the U.S. charts. It's a true mystery. They remain one of the biggest and most successful metal bands of all time, but in the United States, they are defined by this one single glorious ride. Saxon are legends everywhere but America. Our next band is legendary for a different reason. They wrote a song that was so good, another band copied it and became the biggest metal band in the world. 15. Diamond Head. This might be the most important one-hit wonder in heavy metal history. You might not know the name Diamond Head, but you have definitely heard their music. That's because a little band called Metallica loved them so much that they covered their songs over and over again. But this British band from the NWO BHM had a brief moment of their own. Their song from 1980 is an epic masterpiece called Am I Evil? It is one of the most influential metal songs ever written. The song starts with a spooky, classical-inspired intro before kicking into one of the most iconic and evil-sounding guitar riffs of all time. The song's long, complex structure and dark themes basically laid out the blueprint for what would become thrash metal. The original version by Diamond Head was so powerful that it managed to get a little bit of airplay on American radio. But the band's sound was very raw, and they didn't have the support of a big record label. They stayed a small underground band. A few years later, Metallica would record their own, more polished version of the song and introduce it to millions of fans. Diamond Head's influence is absolutely massive, but their own story on the mainstream charts begins and ends with this one legendary evil question. Diamond Head wrote the blueprint for thrash. Our next band also came from that same British scene, and their one hit was a perfect slice of spooky, occult-inspired rock. 16. Angel Witch. In the early days of the new wave of British heavy metal, there was a band that mixed the dark, doomy sound of Black Sabbath with the new, faster style of playing. That band was Angel Witch, and their sound was a unique and spooky brew. Their self-titled song from 1980 is a true cult classic of the genre. The song Angel Witch kicks off with one of the catchiest and most memorable guitar riffs of the entire era. It's both heavy and melodic at the same time. The lyrics were all about dark magic and spooky themes, which was a very popular topic for metal bands at the time. The song was just so good that it managed to get a little bit of notice from rock radio stations in the United States. However, the band's career was very unstable. They broke up and got back together several times, and their sound was probably a little too niche for widespread appeal. They couldn't build on the small success of their one great song. They remain a beloved favorite among hardcore metal fans who appreciate their unique blend of heavy and spooky, a perfect example of a band with one flawless, magical song. Angel Witch was a band of spooky dudes. Our next band proved that you didn't have to be a guy to rock just as hard, if not harder. 17. Girl School. The world of heavy metal in the late 70s and early 80s was almost completely dominated by men, but a band from England called Girl School was about to change that. This quartet of talented women kicked down the door and proved that they could play rock and roll that was just as loud, raw, and aggressive as any of their male counterparts. They played a punky, high-energy style of metal that was completely unapologetic. They were so good that they caught the attention of the legendary Lemmy Kilmister from Motorhead, who became one of their biggest champions. Their 1981 song, Hit and Run, was a perfect example of their sound. It was a snarling, fast-paced banger of a song, full of attitude and energy. The track clicked with rock radio and became a hit. Girls' School toured with some of the biggest bands in the world, like Deep Purple and Rainbow. But their raw, abrasive edge might have limited their appeal to a wider audience in the United States. They were a little too tough for the pop charts. They remained true pioneers, a band that broke down barriers and had one killer hit in the U.S. to prove it. Girls' School was a band of pioneers. Our next band is the total opposite, a group so obscure and so mysterious that they are like a ghost in the history of heavy metal. 18. Grimalkin. Some one-hit wonders are famous for being forgotten. And then there are bands that are so forgotten they become a mystery. That is the story of an American band called Grimalkin. This band seemed to appear out of thin air in 1985, and they disappeared just as quickly. They released a song called Black Mass, which was a heavy, doomy, and riff-driven piece of metal. The lyrics were all about dark, occult subjects, which was common for the time. Somehow, this song from this completely unknown band was just catchy enough that it got picked up by a few rock radio stations. It had a brief, flickering moment on the charts, but the band had no promotion, no music video, and no tour. They were a complete enigma. After releasing one album, the band vanished into thin air. No one really knows what happened to them. They are a true metal mystery, a ghost of a band that left behind one spooky, phantom hit.